Hello and welcome to Stress-Free Longevity. This is episode 3. Today we are talking about aerobic activity and introducing the concept of high-intensity aerobic exercise. I hope you enjoy this episode. Okay, so thank you very much for joining me today. Just for the sake of our listeners, Dr. Vollaard, would you mind just as a starting point, just introduce yourself, where you are working and what your research interests are?
Yeah, no problem. Firstly, thanks again for the invite. It's always a pleasure to talk about my research area and my research. So I'm an exercise physiologist. I studied at the University of Maastricht and then did a master's at Aberdeen and did my PhD at the University of Essex a long time ago now. I've since worked at Heriot-Watt University in Edinburgh, at the University of Bath, and I'm currently at the University of Stirling. So when I started my studies, I was mainly interested in exercise and performance. So how can you improve sports performance in athletes? But during my studies, and certainly once I started working as a lecturer at university, my interests have completely shifted to the health side. So I no longer work with athletes. I no longer try to improve performance. I just try to improve people's health through exercise. And the main area of interest that I'm working on at the moment is what is the minimum amount of exercise that people can get away with in order to reap the health benefits.
Fantastic. So can I just also check, you're not funded by any companies, is that right? Anything you need to disclose?
Yeah, funding always an interesting issue. It is exceedingly hard to get funding for this line of work. Funding for exercise and health should be a priority, but isn't, because people can't make money off it. At least pharmaceutical companies can be. I currently hold one grant that was funded by a company. This company is called Integrative Health Partners. They are a company that produce exercise bikes that have been specifically designed to be able to perform the REHIT exercise protocol that I have developed. I'll hopefully get a chance to talk about that a little bit further. It's a small grant specifically for one study looking at the effects of my exercise protocol on levels of cytokines in the blood. That's one study out of about 50 that I've done. So that's the only conflict of interest that I have to disclose.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Well, look, let's start with a little bit of science first, if that's okay. So why do we exercise? Because that might be relevant to some of the choices that we make. And how important is it, and what are the key benefits of exercise?
I think in answering that question, it's probably important to first define exercise, because not everyone will have the same understanding of it. So what we use in my field is different terms. We talk about sport, we talk about exercise, and we talk about physical activity. Physical activity is anything where you expend energy by moving your muscles. Exercise is a type of physical activity where you do the physical activity in a structured and purposeful manner with a specific purpose, usually to improve your health. Whereas sport is a type of exercise where you do the exercise as part of, say, a competitive environment where there are rules and you compete. So I generally prefer to talk about physical activity, as in people should increase their physical activity levels. We're definitely not aiming to get everyone to do sports, because some people just don't like sports. If you don't play football or you don't like going for runs, then you can just do exercise where it's not competitive, but it's specifically doing the physical activity for reasons of improving your health. But some people don't need any exercise because they may be very physically active in the first place, and that's how it used to be. Exercise is a new thing. People haven't been doing exercise for thousands of years. People have been physically active for millions of years. Throughout our evolution, people had to be active, because if you weren't active, you wouldn't eat. You have to go out hunting or you have to go out gathering, and that would get you the food and able to survive. After the hunting and gathering, people wouldn't go play a game of football or go for a jog just for the fun of it. People would preferably do nothing, because evolutionary, that is way more beneficial. Not expending energy, because every bit of energy that you expend, you'll need to replace again. You have to go get food again, and you might not always be able to get the food. So we have evolved to be physically active, and we are now in a different situation where we are no longer physically active and can still get food. You just drive to the supermarket, or you get your supermarket to deliver your food at your doorstep. So at the moment, there's a mismatch between what our genes, the way they've evolved, expect, as in that we have to go out and run and hunt and gather and be active all day, and what the actual situation is that we are sitting behind computer screens doing our work and not do any physical activity throughout the day. And that mismatch causes disease. Because we can get the food without the physical activity. So we need to do exercise. It's crucial because our body expects it and will get ill if we don't. And that is really the only reason. Yeah, it's for some people it's great. It's enjoyable to play sports, but a lot of people don't like playing sports. Some people may still have physically active jobs, but most people don't. All the rest of us need to do exercise in order to not get ill.
That's a great, wonderful point. I think it's going to lead on nicely to what feels like an explosion in the intensity of exercise. You know, most people are wanting to get healthy and well. There's just bombarded now with intensive exercise programs, gyms, 24 hours a day, et cetera, et cetera. And it feels like there's a need to work very hard and do a lot of intensive exercise to be healthy and well. Is that necessary to compensate for our more sedentary lifestyles, or have we swung a little bit too far?
I don't think we've swung too far. I think part of the answer should refer to the fact that people want to be healthy, of course, and they kind of know what you need to do. A lot of people will think, well, I need to go on a diet. And then there are 30 diets to choose from, and one is even more extreme than the other, and you've got celebrities endorsing them all. But in the end, if you want to lose weight, you'll probably have to go on a diet. Same with exercise. People know they should be a bit more active, and there'll be people saying, well, you need to do this, and other people say you need to do that. But in the end, you just have to do exercise. And the intensity thing, that's an interesting one, and it's very key to my research. I think it's worth first saying that so I teach exercise physiology at university, and in my first lecture introducing exercise physiology to our year one students, the first thing I tell them is that exercise is not healthy. And they'll all look a bit puzzled, and they think, yeah, well, I went to university, studied this, and this is the one thing I already know, exercise is healthy. But it's not. It's not. And then I explain, well, exercise causes substrate depletion. It depletes your energy stores. It causes dehydration. It causes inflammation. It causes muscle damage. Exercise is really bad for your body. If you keep doing exercise, it won't be long until you die. The key thing is that the recovery after exercise is healthy. Exercise is just a kick up the butt for the body, where it thinks, oh, I didn't like that. Like all these negative effects, the dehydration, the inflammation, etc. The body then decides, okay, I need to adapt to make something similar in the future more manageable, so it won't be as bad for me. And that's your training effect or your health benefits. So the recovery is the healthy bit, the bit where the body makes you healthier, so that next time you do the exercise, which is hard for the body, is more manageable. Now, if the kick up the butt is harder, if it's more severe, then you'll get more health benefits more quickly. Now, if it's something is really easy, if you go for a gentle walk to the shops, the body doesn't think that that's very difficult. So it's also not going to try to adapt to be able to manage that walk to the shops next time. And that's a key understanding, because it also means that if you do something that's harder, it's a more severe, what we call disturbance of homeostasis. So it's something the body doesn't like, and therefore it will work harder at adapting, and that means getting healthier. So the high intensity exercise makes use of that, because it's a more severe disruption of homeostasis, because it's a more severe challenge to the body. You'll get the health benefits more rapidly, and they'll be greater. So what you can do is, well, what if you do the hardest exercise possible? And the hardest exercise possible, or the highest exercise intensities that you can achieve, are achieved with something called Wingate sprints, and they are sprints where you reach all out supra maximal intensities. It's the highest intensities that you can possibly do, and unfortunately you need specialist equipment for that, and they will cause a very severe challenge to the body, which means you only need very little of that to get the same health benefits as very low intensity exercise, which is not as much of a challenge to the body. Because if something is low intensity, the challenge comes from the duration. Because if you go for a very long walk, then the body gets challenged, and then you get benefits. For quite a long time, all the advice that people got was do moderate intensity exercise for at least half an hour a day on most days of the week. And that's not because that was the best exercise. The people who recommended that, World Health Organization, all the different national governing bodies, they know that the high intensity exercise may be more beneficial, but they thought, well, people are not going to do that because it's more tiring. So let's make sure that what we recommend people to do is feasible. And they went for the lower side of what may give you health benefits. But that also meant that it had to be quite a lot, like half an hour a day, which isn't really a lot, but for a lot of people, it's something that is not manageable. And only now that we know that after 25 years of having the same exercise recommendations, we see that that doesn't make a difference. The same number of people are not active enough. Now, other people are saying, well, let's just go for a lower volume then, but that needs a higher intensity. And that makes that very popular now. And some of these are fads, like some diets are fads, but some of them are evidence-based and some of them work really well. If you get another exercise physiologist on your podcast, they might say something completely different. I will talk about the facts as I know them, and I'll talk about how I interpret some of the facts, but there is obviously quite a lot of controversy in this area. But a lot of the high-intensity exercise protocols will work really well for improving health because they provide a really strong challenge to the body.
Is there a potential downside to long-term intensive activity? And I'm thinking of extreme cases here. You people who run a lot and then in their 60s or 70s, they have bad knees, bad joints, they can't sustain. Is there a balance between, okay, I might be super fit and healthy now, but if I'm just wanting to do exercise from a longevity and ensuring that I have a healthy older age and I minimize the risk of, cardiovascular disease and other kind of things, is there more of a balance there, do you think? Or is there a potential downside of being very intensive when you're young, physiologically adapting to that, maybe even mechanically adapting to that, and then not being able to sustain that into older age? I don't know if you have any kind of considerations on that.
Lots of considerations. So where to start? Firstly, people who get really old won't have been sedentary. And you're probably right. If you ask them like what sports or what exercise regime did you do, they'll probably say, well, nothing. But that's because they're old. 2 or 3 generations ago, virtually nobody played sports, and exercise is a relatively new thing because we are no longer physically active. People used to get their physical activity from their jobs, from their daily lives, from the fact that they commuted to school and work actively rather than by car. So no, they won't have had exercise regimes, but the current population needs the exercise because we've removed all the other physical activity. It's not built into our day anymore. So it's not that there are old people who manage to get old while being sedentary. That's very unlikely. It's not impossible, but it's very unlikely. Is they will have been physically active enough. So they won't have done a lot of exercise, but they will have done a lot of physical activity. In terms of the intensity issue, so from my perspective, the only reason why we do physical activity, exercise and or sport is for health reasons, and that's not for a short-term benefits, but specifically for the longer-term benefits. You do exercise partly because it will make you live a little bit longer, probably, but mostly because you will live healthily for longer, as in you will delay or completely prevent the onset of diabetes, heart disease, cancer, etc. And therefore, you will still have a good quality of life when you're in your 60s, in your 70s, in your 80s. So if you think, well, you're 35 and not doing very much exercise, but I feel fine, so that's fine. But you won't when you're 65. And you'd probably still like to do the same things, as in you might still want to go on holiday and go swim in the sea or climb a mountain, or you still want to be able to do things. And making sure that you don't get these diseases and that you are going to be able to live healthily at an older age, that is why we do exercise, or that is why we should do exercise. And you can do various different types of exercise. It can be lower intensity, longer duration. It can be higher intensity, shorter duration. And there isn't really anything wrong with the higher intensity exercise, with some provisos. If you were not very active as a child, which probably is true for almost all kids nowadays, and then in your 30s, you decide, well, I really need to start upping my exercise because I want to be healthy when I'm 70 years old. So I'm going to now start running marathons. Then your body is ill adapted to be able to handle that. Your muscles will be thrilled and they'll be super joyed that you're finally going out for these long, hard runs. And they'll adapt really quickly and you'll get fitter and you will be able to run that marathon. But your joints, your ligaments, they will hate it, because they don't adapt very well at all. It takes much longer. And as soon as you start running, they'll suffer and you will get musculoskeletal injuries. And that's obviously something you want to avoid. That is probably worse with higher intensity exercise, although lower intensity exercise for very long durations can have similar problems if you start from a very unfit level. But there's things you can do about that. You can, for example, do cycling-based exercise. You can do high-intensity exercise on a cycle ergometer. You can reach those supra-maximal exercise intensities that I mentioned, the highest you can achieve, but it's cyclical. So you don't really put any stress on your joints. So very little issues musculoskeletally in that respect. So it just depends. There's nothing wrong with higher intensity exercise per se.
I was going to answer, I think you've kind of answered it already. Is there a best form of exercise? But I think what you're saying is probably any type is okay to a point, right, as long as you're physically able and you recover well afterwards. Is that fair? No one's ever convincingly researched and said this one type, even your own, I mean, I think is what you're saying, even your own, although it's excellent, is not necessarily better, but it will suit some people. Is that kind of fair?
That is fair. Maybe it's a good point to briefly introduce the specific exercise protocols that I look at, because it's a fairly extreme type of exercise. So a good 20 years ago, some people in Canada started looking at sprint interval training for health. And up to that point, sprint interval training, which is basically doing repeated, really high intensity bouts of exercise, was purely used by athletes to improve their running performance, cycling performance, etc., and specifically their sprint performance. But this group started looking at aerobic performance, so endurance exercise. So they asked people to do really short sprints, and then they looked at, well, what does that do to your ability to do longer types of exercise? And they found it was vastly improved. And that was completely novel and really interesting, because there is a principle in training physiology, principle of specificity, is that what you train, you'll improve, but only that. But then they came up with this sprint exercise, and it improved something completely unrelated to sprint exercise, so your endurance performance, and therefore probably also your health, because one of the key things that endurance exercise or longer exercise does is improve your health. So I was really interested in their findings, and I started to look at the health benefits of those sprint interval protocols, and got really good results. As in, with really short amounts of low volumes of exercise, you could get health benefits that would normally take way longer to achieve if you would do regular aerobic exercise as recommended. But it was a bit odd, and we wanted to know why that was. And there is a variety of things that we could look at. And I already mentioned it's about the disturbance of homeostasis, or the fact that you challenge the body. And one of the things that is really specific to these high-intensity sprints is that it uses a lot of your muscle glycogen. And muscle glycogen is just sugar stored in your muscle. And it's sitting there for the purpose of being able to fuel these high-intensity sprints. And not for sports, and not because you'll be a better runner or a faster cyclist, but because 100,000 years ago, you'd have to be able to run away when a tiger came chasing you. But we don't have that situation anymore, so we don't use those glycogen stores anymore. You only really use them if you do these really intensive sprints. But if you use them, then you get the adaptations. I won't go into the details with the molecules that get activated with this type of exercise, but we kind of know the pathways that get activated when you do these sprints and why that would lead to health benefits. So we have now developed a 10-minute session, which is just easy pedaling on the bike, not hard at all, but we do 2 20-second sprints in that 10-minute session. So there's 40 minutes of hard exercise within a 10-minute easy exercise session. And you only need to do that twice a week. So it's 20 minutes in a week in total, with a total amount of sprinting of 1 minute and 20 seconds. And that gives you health benefits that are equal to or better than those associated with current physical activity recommendations, which is about half an hour on most days of the week.
Would that apply to a running machine? If you were like walking on an incline, but every so often you did a fast sprint, I take it it's the same.
It's the same if you do it right. So the key thing is here that you have to reach exercise intensities that are high enough. So on a bicycle, that needs a specific bike where you are able to regulate the intensity in a specific way. It's not easy. And that will get you power outputs. Well, you and me would probably reach the equivalent of, say, 1,000 watts. And that probably doesn't mean very much to you. To my students, I usually explain it this way. You've got Tour de France riders, and Chris Froome used to be pretty good, won several Tour de France's. On one of the key breakaways he did in the mountains on one of the stages where he won the Tour de France, he managed to reach power outputs of about 450 watts. And we can easily reach 1,000 watts on the right bike, but only for very short. But it's extremely high exercise intensities, but for really, really short. But anyone can do this. You don't have to get to 1,000. It's very individual. Some people might reach 500. Some people might reach 2,000. But you need to be able to, you need to have specific conditions to be able to reach such high exercise intensities. Now, if you want to run on the flat, you'd never manage because you wouldn't be able to move your legs quick enough. You can do it without specialist equipment if you run up a hill. You can, for brief durations, run up a steep gradient and reach really high exercise intensities that are similar to what we manage in the lab on a specialized bike. So you can do our exercise protocol without any equipment. But we never do this in our research because our target population of people who don't do that much exercise would get injured. So that's the problem with sedentary individuals not accustomed to exercise. Their joints are not going to be able to cope with it. You could do it running upstairs, but you'll at some stage trip over and break your ankle. So a bike is safer in that respect. So yeah, you can do this, but you probably want to stick to the bicycles, and then you need a specialist bit of kit.
Is exercise linear? The more you do, it will constantly be more and more and more and more and more beneficial? Or does there come a point where actually it can be a little bit too much? Because I think there's another issue which we've all experienced is sustainability. And if it's too intensive, it's too costly. It's, how many of us have started gyms, gone all out and don't sustain? And I presume sustainability is another huge factor with longer term health. So it's getting that balance of effort to impact. So is there ever too much? And how do you determine for you as an individual what is the right amount based on your kind of goals? I don't know if that's too difficult to answer.
No, it isn't. So coming back to my previous point, it's not the exercise that is healthy, it's the recovery afterwards. So if you ask, can there be too much? Then for certain there can be too much. If you do exercise, you disturb the body systems, you challenge it, and that will cause adaptations that are beneficial. But you have to have the time to to get those beneficial adaptations. If you start exercising before you have adapted, then you stress the system again. There hasn't been time to adapt. That's just bad. But that is only really relevant to high competing athletes who train all day, every day. So for us mortals, pretty much everybody in the population, that is not an issue because we do so little that there is hardly any chance of doing so much that your body doesn't have a chance to get the health benefits. The less you do, the less you need to improve your health. So training or exercise is different for everybody. An elite athlete will need to do a lot of work to gain a little bit, because for them, a hard training session is something they can handle quite well. Therefore, it doesn't give much of a stimulus, and they won't get much of a training benefit. For regularly healthy individuals, you'd probably need to go jogging or fairly long cycle rides or do these high intensity sprints. That's all fine, to stress the system and to get adaptations that will improve your health. For someone who hasn't done any exercise for a decade, maybe someone who's been bedbound or something like that, just getting up to walk to the toilet and back will stress their system and will give them adaptations that are healthy. So the total amount that you need to get the adaptations varies mainly on how fit you are at the moment. It needs to stress your system. It needs to be something that the body finds at least tiring. So for most people, just an easy walk to the shop that isn't even going to make you breathe harder, that isn't going to stress the system very much. So if that's the type of exercise you want to do, you have to do a lot of it. You'd have to go out for 2-hour walks, and that will then give you benefits. That's fine. If you do slightly higher intensity, then you can get away with less. Yeah. Before you get to the point where it's too much, you'd already be running triple marathons back to back. It's really hard to do too much. The only proviso, again, is that if we haven't been doing much previously, then first our body needs to kind of get used to the exercise, and your muscles are going to be there's no issue at all. They love adapting, they love exercise, but you need to be careful that you don't overload your joints and your ligaments and get musculoskeletal issues. So if you want to increase the amount of exercise, then you have to do it gradually because it takes quite a long time for your body to get used to it. The total amount that you should do is as much as you can. If you don't do anything and you start doing a little bit, then you get fairly substantial health benefits already. If you do a decent amount and you do even more, you'll get more health benefits. And can you measure those? Well, not necessarily. And maybe it doesn't make any difference. For some of us, we can do a little bit of exercise and we won't get diabetes or heart disease or cancer or any of these diseases later in life, and you will be able to still be active when you're 90. But if we look at the averages, then you'd better do a lot of exercise because that will vastly improve your chances of living a healthy life when you're older. How much is the minimum? It depends. What do you want? Do you not want to get diabetes, or do you still want to be able to walk up in Monroe when you're 60, or do you just want to be able to? It just depends. If you do more, then you'll be healthier later in life. You might not feel any better tomorrow, or next year. But think ahead. Think ahead about what do you want to be like when you're 60, 70, 80 years old. If you do more, then you have a much better chance of that being an enjoyable time in your life. Don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does. It does. Thank you very much. I was curious whether there's an element that we don't fully know yet, because this type of intensive exercise is still relatively new, I guess. We haven't even maybe reached a full generation of, and I'm talking like triathlons, ultramarathon, I'm talking super high intensity. Do we know yet the long-term impact of that? I guess there's a really naive observation And again, this is not scientific. You often hear in the news of people who were athletes, sports people, maybe in the 1960s, 70s, who seem to die quite young, in their 60s, 70s. They don't seem to live super long. There'll be a lot of confounding factors. There'll be drinking, there'll be smoking, and there'll be lots of other things. But I don't know if there is data per se at all. Do we know scientifically outcomes for people who are maybe professional athletes who do it intensively for numbers of years? Do they live longer? Do they, or is it just too complex a subject, too many confounding factors to know?
It's obviously super complex. I think the people that you referred to who were top athletes and die at a young age, I think one very important factor is that they were probably competing at a time where doping was very prevalent. It's still prevalent, but probably not as bad as it was. And we've got East German athletes from the 80s who died in their 30s from a variety of conditions. They all got anabolic steroids for 10 years. That's not a normal condition. So it's not about the exercise that they did, but the drugs that they took. People will get more skeletal muscular issues when they do these very long ultra endurance events, marathons, triathlons, etc. It's often not good for your musculoskeletal system, but that's often also related to the fact that these athletes train so differently during adulthood compared to what they were kind of getting used to as kids. So if we look at maybe Kenyan or Ethiopian athletes who, when they are school kids, they run to school for 5 or 10 kilometers every day and back. That's quite a different upbringing from, say, kids in Scotland who might pick up running when they're 15 or 16 at school. So there are a lot of confounding factors as to what is actually good and what is actually bad. But as far as I'm aware, there's no research whatsoever to suggest that doing lots of exercise will have a negative impact on your chances of growing to a very old age or your health other than musculoskeletal injuries in later life. So it's very difficult to do too much. If you do too much exercise, it's usually no longer a long-term thing. It's usually more a short-term thing. If you do too much exercise as an athlete, you'll get overtrained and your performance start decreasing. And often an athlete will then think, oh, that means I'm not training hard enough. They'll start training even harder and they get into a vicious cycle where the performance drops even further because they're even more overtrained. But for the general population, this is not an issue at all. Doing too much is hard.
Do you have any thoughts about sustainability? I mean, it's such a common phenomenon now that people like me get to their mid-40s and think, oh, I need to do a bit more. I'll join that gym. I'll get that, whatever. And I don't know what the statistics are, but I'm sure there's a pretty high drop-off rate. So I want to kind of find the right amount that's a reasonable, sufficient amount, but I know that I'll be able to keep it up and I'll probably be able to continue to do it into later life. And maybe there's a little bit of crossover with another question I had coming up, and that was about obesity. And it's probably a similar thing, there's this intense dieting, intense exercising, which again can get some good early results, but I think there's this yo-yo effect. So I don't know whether intensive exercise with short-term goals is good, or if there's maybe longer-term goals with more medium intensity, more sustainable exercise. I don't know if any research has been done on that, or if that's again just personal preference.
No, it's clear that it's hard. I think just like with dieting, any calorie restrictive diet is effective at helping people lose weight. That's just how it works. But if you look at a year later, then people will have probably regained that weight plus more, because it's really hard to sustain the diet because there's plenty food available and you have to now forever not eat as much as you'd like of the food stuff that you like. And that's the same for exercise. Most people just don't like exercise. And that's not a strange thing because, again, evolutionary, if you look at, say, 10, 20,000 years ago, it was much better to not like to do any exercise when you needed to do it, when you didn't need to do it, than to just go out and go for runs all the time, because you'd expend energy. You'd have to find the food to cover that. So the fact that some people like exercise or sport, that's great for them, but most people won't. And to, for the rest of your life, do something you don't like, which is really easy not to do just by saying, "Oh, I'll do it tomorrow." It's very difficult to sustain it. And yeah, in January it's easier because you've just made your New Year's resolutions, and you can tell yourself, "I'm just going to do this." But in February, March, that's much harder because you've been doing it for a while now, and there's other things to do, and you're busy, and usually it isn't very nice. So that makes it really hard. So you have to find something you like, and there might not be anything like that. And then you have to figure out other ways of doing this. Set yourself a goal. Well, I want to run a 10K. Yeah, and then you can work towards that, and that makes it easier. But maybe then you burn that 10K, and then it's hard to continue because that goal is gone. So sometimes goal setting helps, but not always. And as you say, we're not talking about the next few months. We're talking about the next few decades. So what I would say is the easiest. No, well, it's not easy. Is the best way of doing this is making sure that it's not something you have to think about, where it's no longer a conscious decision. Shall I go to the gym this evening? It's been a really busy day, and I still have to look after the kids. It's not going to happen. That is a conscious decision you have to make. That makes it something that is likely to fail in the longer term. If you don't have to think about it, then it might be easier. I'm Dutch. I don't know if you've ever been to Holland, but if you walk on the streets, then a noticeable difference with the UK is that there are fewer people with overweight or obesity.
And everyone's cycling.
Yeah, exactly. That's my point. It's not because we're genetically different or that our diet is healthier or that we do more sports. No, the only difference between the two countries is the act of transport. If we go somewhere, then we take a bicycle. You don't think about it. That's just how you go places. You cycle to school, you cycle to work, and you cycle to the shop. That's the main difference, and that's on a population level has such a big effect on chronic disease. If you look at diabetes levels, etc. And yeah, if you start doing that now, if you would decide I'm going to buy a bicycle and I'm going to start cycling, yeah, that is still a period where it's difficult. But once you overcome that, and it's just the way you go to work or the way you go to the shop, then it's free physical activity. It doesn't cost you any time because it doesn't cost you any more time than driving usually, as long as it's not very far. And once you're used to that, it's easier to maintain because it's not something extra to do.
One thing that we haven't talked about is we've talked a lot about aerobic, and obviously strength exercising is now the big fashion, or at least not ignoring it and its benefits. Anything you'd like to say on if you are considering exercising for health and longevity? We probably have ignored it in the past. It's just been running, cycling, but now it's all about ensuring that we're looking after our muscles. Anything you'd like to say on that as well?
Yeah, I think you might get a different exercise physiology. You will disagree with me, but I would say that if you have very little time to do exercise or you just don't like it and you're doing very little at the moment, then you would probably get more benefits from something that will improve your fitness levels than something that will improve your strength. So if you go to the GP and you ask, well, I want to know like how healthy I am and what my risks are of getting diabetes or heart disease or anything like that, then your GP will probably measure your blood pressure or your cholesterol, and those are not the best measures. The best measure of your risk of future disease and your chances of living longer is your fitness level, your aerobic fitness level, or your ability to take up oxygen. And that is something that you improve with either the longer duration, lower intensity exercise or these very high intensity sprints, but not with strength training. Yeah, it's great if you can also do strength training, but maybe you're asking too much of a lot of people because it's not going to happen anyway. So do the other stuff in preference, I would say, if you've only got the 10 minutes to spare. So if you can incorporate something fantastic. If you can incorporate both, even better. And if you can do more, then you're going to be healthy, and you're going to be happy when you're older. But I realize that it's really, really, really difficult, and we need to make sure that we remove as many barriers to it as possible, to make it as easy as possible to stick with it. Now, and you were mentioning that you would like to do this at home. What we are looking at is enabling people to do this type of the exercise protocol that we've developed at their workplace. Most people will work at a desk and sit down all day. What if your workplace had a little room somewhere with a specialist exercise bike that you could use to do our 10-minute protocol? It's really easy cycling. Yeah? It's just pedaling your legs with 2 20-second brief sprints in there. These sprints are hard because they're supra-maximal. It's the hardest intensity that you can do, but they're only 20 seconds. So you recover really quickly. You don't generate much heat because the exercise isn't long enough, which means you don't sweat. If you don't sweat, you can do this in your work clothes, so you don't need a shower afterwards. So really what this would involve is 2 times a week at work, you go to this little room, hop on that bike, do a 10-minute exercise session, and that will give you health benefits that are equal to or probably better than what you would get if you would actually stick to physical activity recommendations, which most people don't manage. That would work. Now, why not do that at home? Well, because you need that specialized bike, and that's the crux here. They cost money, and you're not going to buy one of those for 2 times 10 minutes. Put that in wherever you can fit it. Whereas at work, if your employer gets one of those, then at least 50 people can make use of the same bike feasibly. That's a lot of people. That makes it a really cheap exercise bike. That might work. So that way we remove a lot of barriers. It's easy. You don't have to you don't need transport to your work. It's cheap. People don't like having a shower afterwards. That makes it longer as well. People don't like the sweating. So we need to find types of exercise that will enable people to stick to the exercise routine by removing all those barriers. That's where we need to go now. Because people will never like exercise if they didn't do it in the first place. If they like it, they would do it already. So those people who don't currently do the exercise, it's not something they will start enjoying. It's just not going to happen. Just make it easy and make it clear to them what the benefits are. It's not about losing weight. Now, losing weight is great if you can. It's usually more for aesthetic purposes than for health purposes. You need to do the exercise with the view of a healthier life later on in life, and that needs to be made easy. We need to remove the barriers.
Thank you very much. Can I ask you a few other kind of side questions on this? Is there a time of day that when you exercise there's more impact, or is it completely the same throughout the day?
Well, let's say that you can have, in terms of health, you can be at 0 or at 100. And if you don't do any exercise, then you can never reach a score more than 50 or so. If you then have a shit diet as well, then you might not be able to get over 25. The effect of time of day, even though we know very little of it, will never be more than 0.01% of that scale. It might make an effect, and we might be able to measure it. It might be publishable, but it'll be so small that it doesn't matter. If you do the exercise and you can only do it in the morning, then just do it in the morning if that suits you. It won't make a difference.
Are there any other factors that impact the impact of exercise? What I mean by that is, when we think of trying to be healthy and well, nearly everyone thinks exercise and nutrition, and doesn't always think sleep, mindset, other things. Do the other pillars of life impact? And I guess the point I'm trying to make is there a benefit if we're really committed to being healthy and well, giving some, and maybe some significant time and energy to addressing the other pillars? Is that likely to make the exercise even more beneficial if you're sleeping well, if you're eating well, if you've got a good positive mindset? I don't know if there's much data on that.
Well, as you already said, they're all super important. You can't expect to be overall healthy if all you do is have a healthy diet, but you don't do any exercise and your sleep is bad. That's just not enough. They're all pillars, so they each support your health. Whether changing your other factors will improve the impact of exercise is probably the other way around. The biggest impact of exercise will be in the least healthy individuals. So I would expect exercise to make a more noticeable difference in someone who has a bad diet and someone who has a good diet, just because they start at a lower level of health. That doesn't mean that you should have a bad diet. It just means that as a percentage, you'll probably see the benefits more. You'll need all of them. I don't think any of them will impact the benefits that you get from exercise per se. I don't think that if your diet is healthier, that you will get more benefits from exercise. You just have to look after both.
Are you a big fan of devices? Now, clearly, you've mentioned the bicycle. So I'm not talking about fitness machines per se. I'm probably talking more about Fitbits and all this data. Is it absolutely helpful? Is it helpful for some people, but a burden for others? Is there a consensus, or is it just, if you like it, do it, but if you don't?
The latter. It's something that might help with your motivation. I use Strava because it will help me. I like data. I like to see it all, and I'd like to track it, and it helps me keep motivated. Same with step counters. Some people like to see that they've done 10,000 steps, and if they've missed a day, they'll feel bad and they'll try harder next day. And if they wouldn't have the step counter, they might not have done that. So for some people, it's really helpful. You need the motivation somehow. For some people, it comes from liking the exercise. From some people, it comes from wanting to track it and to see the data, and that might help them stick to their routine. So if that's you, then definitely use them. There's nothing wrong with it. Whether it's a burden to some, if it is, then stop using them. It's in the end, it's all about doing the physical activity. And I do think that for some people, it can be really helpful because it's hard to motivate yourself.
So just going back on the strength thing again, I think that recently I've been hearing over and over repeatedly this thing about grip strength, and apparently grip strength is this most accurate measure of longevity. Is grip strength just a general marker of overall general health? And I presume the reverse isn't true. Like if you suddenly start exercising your grip, you're going to live longer. Well, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the former, it's very likely to be a marker of your overall physical ability. If your grip strength is higher, then you're probably stronger overall, which means that you will have to have been doing enough physical activity to get there, and that will have given you health benefits. It's just a correlation. And indeed, if you start doing grip strength exercises only and you develop these massive forearms, then that's not going to do anything because it doesn't do anything to the rest of your body. Rock climbers will have fantastic grip strength, and those are not all people who live to 110. Going back on the grip strength training, though, this is probably more interesting. So yes, there's a correlation between grip strength and a risk of disease and longevity, etc. But grip strength training can be one of the best ways of lowering your blood pressure. So we're talking about isometric training here. So anything where you hold and sustain a contraction for a certain duration of time and do that repeatedly will cause physiological changes in your bloodstream, which I won't bother you with, but that will reduce your blood pressure. If you have high blood pressure, you go to the GP, you'll probably get medication, even though they are supposed to tell you that you should change your lifestyle. They usually don't, they just give you medication. The best way of lowering your blood pressure is several times a week, just while you're watching TV, have one of those grip strength thingies. And you don't even have to hold it for as hard as you can, but it might not be easy to judge it, but about 30% of what you can maximally do, hold that for about 20 seconds, do that maybe 3 or 4 times in a 10 minutes period, and that will lower your blood pressure. It's the simplest type of exercise that you can do. completely unrelated to what we were talking about, but
I
something
love
that I
that.
find is very interesting.
That is very interesting. Any other little tidbits like that you would like to share, or any other kind of, fads or anything you'd like to debunk about the current kind of health and wellness and physical activity space?
No, I think the main thing is really that if you do more physical activity, then you will increase your chances of living to a longer age, while having more healthy years, and that's probably the key thing. Is in yes, you might become 90 years old, but if 20 of those years at the end are spent lying in bed, then what's the point? Being physically active will mean that you're more likely to spend those 20 years enjoying life while you're still able to do things. And there is no type of physical activity that is then better than any other. So if your personal trainer says, well, this is what you need to do and all the other stuff is wrong, then he or she doesn't understand what he's talking about. If you do something, then fantastic. If you do a little bit more, then great.
Fantastic. Well, look, I think we've come pretty much to the end, but I'm going to go back to the kind of beginning, or I guess the purpose of this episode and the podcast and YouTube channel in general. And that's this concept of efficiency in health and wellness. I want to know that I'm doing enough to live fairly healthily now and to maybe maximize or promote some healthier years in the latter years, but not to do too much, that for two reasons that I know that I will find it hard to sustain and may have negative impacts on my body. But I thought I would, if you were okay with this, I would get you to just give a comment on, following this conversation, what I kind of have in my head as what I'm intending to do. I want to know that I'm just doing a few good things that will increase my chances of a healthy life. Because listen, you could die tomorrow, so I don't want to obsess. I just want to know that I'm doing some good things. So my three core principles in my head are: I want to do some aerobic activity. I happen to have a running machine. So what I've started doing recently is get up in the morning. First thing I do is I do 30 minutes on the walking machine, just a gentle walk mixed with some inclines, mixed with fast walking that get me at least 3 or 4 times out of puff that I have to slow down again. But I'm thinking as well with what you were saying about the high intensity. I know it's different. I won't meet the wattage that you can get on the bike, but I might include some short sprints as well, just to increase my wattage a little bit. Number 2 would be the strength. So I'm thinking of incorporating a little short exercise routine. I haven't figured out what that is yet, but with some free weights in the house, 20 minutes, a series of exercises that kind of work the core muscles and trying to push it to a little bit of muscle fatigue. And thirdly, I think my third thing is generally having a little bit more physical activity generally throughout the day. So trying to make the more physically active, or take the more physically active option at every opportunity I have. So taking the stairs if I don't have to, or walking there if I, instead of taking the car, essentially. So what would be your passing comment on my plans?
I think it's an excellent idea. Yeah, if you feel that is feasible for you, then you'll get benefits from that. Then you're reducing your risk of certain diseases at later life. You might live a bit longer, and the time that you live longer will be healthier and therefore more enjoyable. If you would ask your made-up self who lived 20,000 years ago, then they will probably laugh at it. Like, okay, so in this whole day, all you did was spend 10 minutes on that stepper. Like, of course, we're not talking about the levels of physical activity that our body is expecting. But if you can do this instead of not doing this, then you are going to reap great benefits from that. There's no doubt about it. If you've done this for a while and you think, well, great. Yeah, that makes me feel good. And I can actually do a little bit more, then do a little bit more, and you'll increase your health benefits more. Because it's what you say, enough is really difficult to quantify. Yeah, all of us are at risk of cancer, of heart disease, of diabetes, etc. And maybe it's a percentage chance. Yeah? And you have to make that choice. What is enough for you? Do you want to have no chance of diabetes? Then you have to be really active and look after your diet, etc. And even then, you might still get diabetes. Yeah? If you think that a 25% chance of diabetes is too much, you have to have a certain level of activity. The more active you are, the more you bring that percentage chance down. It will still be there. You might still get cancer. Certain cancers are not even affected by physical activity. But you need to decide how important that is to you compared to how much you do not like to do exercise at the moment. If you definitely want to be really healthy when you're 80 years old, then you're going to have to make sacrifices now. You can still start doing exercise when you're 60s and reduce your chances, but not as much as if you start now. So what you suggest is great if that works for you. If it is too much, and in 2 months' time it's kind of all gone out the window because you were too busy and it wasn't. Then that's unfortunate. But at least you tried. Then you'll have to kind of modify your plans and maybe settle for a lower level of physical activity. But anything you can do to be more active will benefit you. And I think just that awareness of that is what you're doing it for might help. You can, every time you see an elevator, tell yourself, no, I'm not going to take that elevator. I can just take the stairs because I do not want to have a heart attack when I'm 70. You need to work on that now. I think the third one that you had is probably one of the ones that I would favor. If you indeed can just be more active at times when it doesn't cost you anything, where it's not, I have to fit in 20 minutes of exercise. No, you just walk instead of taking the car. If you cycle instead of taking the car, usually it's not slower unless it's a long journey. Yeah, buy a bicycle.
Be more Dutch. Be more Dutch.
Be more Dutch.
I
if
think
everyone would be like the Dutch, then there would be no.
I think that's a T-shirt slogan. Be more Dutch.
But it helps.
Do you know, I was going to leave it there and that was going to be my end, but actually just when you were chatting, if I can ask one final question.
Yeah, go for it.
Personalized medicine is becoming so popular across all of medicine. Do you think exercise will ever be personalized? I mean, it probably is in a sense, in terms of what you're physically capable of doing. But do you think, could you ever see it getting to a stage where literally you look at someone's genetics, mechanics, physiology, whatever, and you can literally go, this is the perfect exercise plan for you, perfect length of time, perfect type of exercise. You need that. Like you're nearly prescribed an exercise plan. Do you think it'll ever get that far?
Yes. So it is actually one of my other research areas. So I used to co-run a company which sold genetic tests that would tell you whether you were likely to be a low, medium, or high responder for changes in fitness levels with exercise. So we know that if a large group of people all do an identical training program, that not everybody will improve their fitness to the same extent. Some people will get a big increase, and some people will not increase at all. I would call them low responders. And part of that is differences in genes. And we know that, and we can measure those. We found out which genes they are, and we can predict it. So we can take a blood sample of you, measure those genetic differences, and tell you whether you're likely to improve your fitness a lot if you start a certain exercise regime. Now, that is the very, very, very start of this quest to personalized medicine, because it doesn't really tell you very much yet, because I can't then tell you what you should do or whether that would impact your health. But we do know that certain genetic variants, or more likely certain epigenetic differences, will influence how well you will respond to exercise and to different types of exercise. So indeed, at some stage, we will be able to tell you, well, you could do this re-hit exercise intervention that you just heard about, that is only 10 minutes a week. But that doesn't do very much for you. For you, it's much more useful to do these long, lower intensity exercise bouts. And yes, we will be able to tell you what is going to work best for you. Whether that then will also be something that we can help you motivate for so you'll actually do it, that remains to be seen. That's much more difficult. But yeah, I do think we'll be able to tell you what would work best for you, but give it another 10, 20 years.
Listen, thank you so much. That's been a very enlightening conversation, and we will put in the show notes a link to the HIIT exercise program, and even to the bicycle as well, and anything else. If there's any other little research papers or anything else that you would be happy for us to link to or to provide on the website, then we'll add that in as well.
Yeah, pleasure. Thanks for the invite.
Thank you so much. Take care. Thanks a lot now.
Cheers.
So many thanks to Dr. Niels Vollaard for that really insightful interview. I think my key take-home points are: number one, exercise itself is not healthy, but it's the body's adaptation afterwards which is the healthy part. Number two, we need exercise because we evolved to be physically active, hunting and gathering food, which we no longer need to do. Our bodies like that level of activity and gets ill if we don't do any. Number three, it's a balance between intensity and duration. We can either do low intensity exercise for long durations or high intensity exercise for short durations, or anything in between. It's helpful to be pushed to a level of feeling out of puff. And if time is a limiting factor, there's now evidence that very short bursts of very high intensity exercise provide significant benefits, so there is no excuse. Number four, the key reason for exercising is for our future selves. Of course, it can help us lose weight and be more vibrant in the short term, but the true reason is to help us live longer and to make those latter 10, 20 or 30 years more enjoyable. And finally, number five, the key to long-term success is making it sustainable, ideally building it into our everyday lives so it is less of a conscious decision. Some examples would be increasing our general physical activity, for example, walking to the shops instead of taking the car, take the stairs instead of the lift, take up cycling to work, or consider ways to integrate physical activity into the workplace. Many thanks again to Dr. Niels Vollaard. Don't forget you can access additional videos and insights on YouTube and social media channels. Simply search Stress Free Longevity, all one word, or visit stressfreelongevity.com. Until next time, take care.